someone is dealing with, mental health
mental
crisis and so on, they're labeled as being possessed by demons.
Therapy is slowly beginning to become accepted, more accepted.
For the people that don't really believe in
idea, right? You show up to somebody that you don't have any idea who they are, and you're supposed to tell them every deep, dark secret about who you are.
In terms of what's the difference between therapist, a counselor, and a psychologist?
So a psychologist is somebody who has a background in strictly psychology, right? And that one is kind of limiting. It's super Eurocentric. It's super white dominated. In all of my life, in all of my different professions, is people have so many stories, and it's important that we share the stories. And the more stories we have, the richer and more information we can have about the world around us.
Because a lot of people nowadays, they're afraid of confrontation.
They can start bullying other people online.
Exactly.
And that's no good either, right? So the idea of sitting down face to face is so important, or even having dialogue online. Narratives are so powerful. Narratives can either oppress people, or narratives can liberate people, right?
But how do you see the stigma around mental health changing, especially with increased awareness in the recent years?
A global lockdown, basically, is something we've never imagined. We couldn't imagine that in our own psyche. So first of all, that was a major leap. We're whoa, and it was took us too much. It was whoa, blew up my...
Men throughout society, we're expected to be strong. We're expected to deal with issues, and a lot of people say men do not. Some people say men don't have feelings.
This is what we're taught in society, is that men need to be hyper masculine. Food was super important to us, and that was a place where we could feel calm and connected, even though the amount of chaos and nonsense that was happening around us, right? But really being aware of what you put into your body is step one, right? And being aware too of how your body feels, your mind, your physical body. And that's something we talk about. So I grew up in a lot of domestic violence. I experienced a lot of physical violence, poverty, sexual violence, community.
What made you stay in that relationship for 10 years? Because
your brain chemistry actually changes when you're in abusive relationships, right?
Yo, what's good, man? It's Easy Pinchot Podcast with your one and only host, Glory Boy, back here with another special guest in the building. We had to give you a hand of applause, for taking time out of your schedule and actually showing up.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Today's going to be an amazing conversation, and that conversation is going to be in regards to therapy.
Yeah.
Because, I was just having a conversation with you before we even started this, and I told you how in my culture, when someone is going crazy, someone is dealing with, mental health crisis and so on, they're labeled as being possessed by demons. Yeah. And when I came to America, I never really heard of therapy until I came here. And I was like, wow, so people just sit down with someone and just talk about their business. How'd they do that?
Right. I didn't know this existed. And then you come to the U.S., and even still, it's really hard. Therapy is slowly beginning to become more accepted by the younger generations. But like you're saying, it wasn't in your culture, demons. That was the best way to help is through prayer.
Right, prayer. Yeah.
And here we are actually we're learning to communicate about our feelings and what's happened to us with less shame. Yeah.
Yeah. And guys, before we even start this, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. And let's just get straight into it. I want you to just, introduce yourself, tell the people who you are, what you do, and we can start this conversation.
Okay. I am a mental health therapist, a psychotherapist, licensed in New York. And I work primarily with women right now. And my first job out of school was with a startup named TIA, which is integrated mental health and physical health. So it felt like a pretty dope experience. It gave me a lot of experience. And then since then, I've been working with one independent therapist to kind of work my thing, do my little magic. And it took me a long time to become a therapist, to find out that that's what I wanted to do. So again, I'm Liz Colman, and you can find me at lizcolman.care. And you can find me on Psychology Today, easy breezy. The way I look at what my practice is I combine science, psychology, human behavior, a little bit of hood experience to be able to kind of talk to people the way that I know how to talk to people, the way that I know how to relate to people, and a little bit of revolutionary kind of experimental stuff. So I incorporate a lot of different techniques.
Right. That's amazing. That's amazing. But and what really got you? Because you say you had to find that therapy was
Mm.
something that you enjoyed doing. But like, what really made you feel like, okay, this is something that this is my calling.
Mm.
You know, this is something that I want to do for a very long time and continue to practice.
Yeah, it took me a while. So I went to my last master's program here at UB. I moved here in 2019. And, oh, hold on. Pause. Okay, take it
No
from the top.
problem. Yep. No problem.
All right, so I moved here in 2019, and it took me a while to become a therapist, to figure out that I wanted to become a therapist. It was my second master's degree. When I was a kid, I used to write a lot of poetry in elementary school. And later in life, I found out that narrative therapy is a thing. So my undergraduate was in writing, was in art in that sense. And that was just for a way for me to process what was going on in my life and in my world. And then I ended up becoming a teacher to teach English in like the prison system and the incarceration system and community. And so I really understood the power of sharing one's narrative. And then I went to art school in Toronto for my master's, and it was in digital production, digital storytelling, but specifically trauma narratives. So being able to express what we feel on the inside, but it's so difficult to express the nuances of what does it feel like to have what does it feel like to have a panic attack?
Right.
What does it feel like to have depression? What does it feel like to survive sexual assault and rape? And to be able to share these with like bed music, sounds, voice, motion graphics, videos. And from there, I was like, okay, I worked in the field. I worked in art for a long time. And then I lost my work visa in Canada, and I went back to LA, went to LA, and I became a nanny. And I was so depressed. I loved the family that I worked for. It was amazing. But I was trying to break generational cycles. And I remember my aunt, who was like my second mom, she was a nanny, and I wanted to be able to kind of like do more, right, than what my family was able to. First generation college graduate, first person to kind of like really find their different career path. My family were all bakers. And so to kind of like educate myself and find that liberation is kind of how I figured to go into therapy. But the turning moment for me was therapy saved my life. And I realized that if I can change, if there's people, like if you can go to counseling and therapy, do the work, investigate, you can heal yourself. And you don't have to be stuck in a certain mindset. You don't have to be stuck in a certain emotional experience, right? And we all suffer trauma, and it's about kind of processing it. So once I realized I can combine my artwork, my writing for narrative therapy, and my ability to connect with people, that just kind of energy to energy, being able to like be a super empath, it just was like a perfect fit. And I love doing it, and it's such a blessing to be able to do what you love to do, what comes naturally to you. So I feel super blessed. Yeah.
Most definitely. And also just about therapy and mental health, because, there's a lot of misconception,
So many.
so many. So what are some common misconceptions about therapy that you like to clear up? I mean, just being someone that have been doing it for a very long time right now. So, for the people that don't really believe in therapy.
Yeah. Therapy is an intimidating idea, right? You show up to somebody that you don't have any idea who they are, and you're supposed to tell them every deep, dark secret about who you are, right?
That's what used to confuse me.
And so it's scary, right?
Right.
So a couple misconceptions is it goes slow, right? Healing is a slow process sometimes. So to go in there and expect that you're going to be in therapy for just a couple weeks is probably not accurate. It takes time to be able to like be comfortable with yourself, to be able to access some emotions and thoughts and be able to process and even communicate things to somebody else. So that's one thing is like therapy is not a short process. And
You can keep going.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's the beauty of it. Because like you can hear the sounds outside.
Right? We get the ambience, right?
You get the ambience,
Exactly.
right?
Scene setting. So another misconception about therapy is that you are stuck with whatever therapist you find. The most important the determinant for best success in therapeutic setting with psychotherapy or counseling is that you connect with your person, you connect with your therapist, and that you feel comfortable with them. So you can shop around. You can go on like little dates with therapists. You get 15-minute free consultations, a lot of them. And so to be able to pick and choose, right? So to think you don't have to just choose one and stick with it, but you have the liberty to make choices in therapy.
Right. That's and also like just let me say you have a new client,
Hmm.
right? And how do you like approach the first session with that new client? Like how do you basically like expect from them and what do you want them to expect from you as well?
Right. And that kind of goes really well off of what are some misconceptions. So, one thing that I always tell people when they come to see me is that you're in the driver's seat, right? I'm in the passenger seat, and I have the roadmap. I have the training, the experience, whatever. But I let you guide. So if there's something that's stressful in your life, something that's bringing you to therapy, I know if we go left, we go to the mountains. If we go right, we go to the water. And I know how to navigate those metaphorical terrains, right? So you're really in control of your therapy as well, right? You're not beholden to the therapist or the psychotherapist. You don't have to show up knowing what you want to do as well, what you need to talk about. That's our job. We know how to ask questions. We know how to dig into things that we can sense or understand about your behavior, your childhood, your family systems. So on day one, it's a lot about tell me about yourself. Like, who are you? Who did you want to be? Are you that person that you want today? What was your family like? What did we learn from them? What kind of relationships have you been through?
Right. No, that's I mean, cause I think I have one of my friend that's actually in therapy,
Mm,
and he came to me actually and said, "Yo, bro, like I've never tried this, but
yeah.
man, like I don't even tell nobody my business,
Yep.
you know." But
I don't tell anybody
like I
anything.
literally open up to this person that I barely even know.
Right?
So that's why I'm like, what do they do
How does it get there?
to make you to
Hmm.
open up? You know, and also because I know everything is like kept between the two of
Totally
you,
confidential.
only confidential.
Yeah.
You know, so like, do you mention that before you start the session so that way they're aware of that?
Absolutely. So we do the whole what is HIPAA, right? And that's your information, your health insurance information, privacy. It doesn't go anywhere. That I'm the only person or the therapist is the only person who's going to see this.
Right.
Um, and that goes into a lot of politics that I can get to a little bit later if we need to, but that's getting into the weeds. But letting people understand that you show up, you start to create this bond with somebody, and there becomes this really sacred place, right? It's very reverent. And even through digital therapy, I do virtual therapy video sessions. And even in like this virtual space, you're able to create a really beautiful, safe setting where if after you start to come back a couple of times and you see like, okay, I'm safe, this is going slowly,
Right.
it starts to become a space that you look forward to being in, that you know that it shuts out the entire world. It's just you sharing whatever you want with this other person who you trust.
All right. And also, because you mentioned, actually, I wanted to ask you this question because, you know, as when we're in school, we have counselors. You know,
Yeah,
when
yeah,
we're in
yeah.
school, we have counselors. We have, you know, people like advisors and so on.
Mm.
So, how, like, what would you say in terms of like, what's the difference between therapist, a counselor, and a psychologist?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, this is really great. So, a psychologist is somebody who has a background in strictly psychology, right? And that one is kind of limiting. It's super Eurocentric, it's super white dominated in terms of thought and theory. So, it's very westernized, and it has a lot of white supremacy that we may or may not recognize, but you have to have the intellect to know that, right? So, it's very strict, and they have a very rigid rule, right? So, when we think about psychology, that's kind of what you think, right? So someone who's a little more buttoned up, a little bit more stuck in one mindset. And no shade to any psychiatrists, none at all, or psychologists, none at all. Counselors can be considered therapists too if they're a clinical counselor, right? And that's different if you see somebody who's a life coach. A life coach is somebody who's not certified in anything particularly. They may have a small weekend certificate or like something that's not super rigorous. So understanding that they can help you to a certain limit, right? And so therapists and psychotherapists, we have a way to work in psychodynamic work, right? So I have a master's in social work. I'm an LCSW now, or an LMSW now, and I'm working on my final licensure. The application's in. I'm waiting for like the test. So I have my baby license that's about to be completely full. No take backs. Government, no take backs. And then you get free and you broke that chain. And then you're like, oh my God, I can get money and profession. And like, there's like, you've made it to this certain point, right? And so in psychotherapy and in social work, we use mixed methods, right? So we're really about human behavior. We're about what made you become who you became, versus in psychology, as a psychologist, is going to look at you more like a diagnosis, right? What are your symptoms? What's going on here? How can we manage that? And as a psychotherapist, it's all about talking. It's all about what are you thinking? And personally, you have to be a really good, in my mind, you have to be a really good interviewer, right? Luckily, I have a background in radio, so it teaches you how to ask questions, right? Follow-up questions, dig deeper. And not to say that that doesn't happen in psychology with psychologists, but in my mind, social work, even though social work has such a negative connotation in so many communities, mine included,
Right.
that I was a little bit leery about getting into it, but the UB had a good program. There's some really phenomenal professors there, like Dr. Chris St. Ville. Shout out to Dr. Chris St. Ville. He was amazing. And I hear great things about his wife, although I never had classes from her.
But yeah, and also, every profession have their own ways of, approaching a problem.
Yeah.
Like even throughout therapy, I know you guys do have techniques and other forms of, ways of, assisting and helping our client. So like, could you explain some of the common therapeutic approaches, such as like in terms of like cognitive behavioral, therapy, mindfulness based therapy, and how do they work?
It's a great question. Okay. So cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is really popular because it's, in my mind, the first step into kind of getting into therapy and thinking about how do we think about thinking, right? So it's all about cognition, the way we think. So it looks at your behaviors and like, okay, so if you are drawn to a certain behavior, a certain coping skill, like that could be negative now, but it helped you get through something in the past, we learn to like change behavior in that way. So it's really about how do I think and how do I feel? So that's step one. Dialectical behavioral therapy is one of my favorite ones. I'm trained in that and certified in that. And it combines some of the cognitive behavioral therapy, the CBT, but the dialectical part is it has other mixed methods. It has a lot of mindfulness, meditation, a lot of ways to go a little more scientific and a little more deep with different tools for getting to the root of some of the things we can't always access, right, the deeper stuff. So I really love that. My favorite is narrative therapy, well, after DBT. Narrative therapy, right? So you could write a poem, you could write a rap, you could write a short story, you could write anything like this, right? But it starts to get the story and the language out of your body. It crystallizes it. And in this really phenomenological, fantastic way, it helps you relieve the physical symptoms and the mental anguish that comes with some of these burdens that we carry around. So I really love that one, DBT. I love narrative therapy. I'm psychodynamic, so you can choose like a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But for trauma, right, I specifically work a lot in trauma. I'm a trauma specialist. And so working with trauma, my favorite modality and what changed my life too, there were two therapists that really helped me change my life. And the second one, she did DBT, or not DBT, EMDR. And that
What is EMDR?
Yeah, it's eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing. Okay. So it's basically...
It's a lot into it.
Yeah, okay, so this one's wild because this one takes a lot of steps.
Right.
So this one really gets down to the deep root of a lot of traumatic experiences. So people who have PTSD or complex PTSD, which stems from childhood, often childhood abuse and trauma. But CPTSD, complex PTSD, could also come from long-term abusive relationships, family dynamics that are abusive, a lot of different situations, but it has to be something that has recurred for a long time, right? Okay. So it's not just a one-off like an accident or something of that nature.
Right. And we in 21st century, a lot of things have been going left and right.
Yeah, man.
A lot of things have been going left and right. So like as a therapist yourself, you have had people come in with different problems. But what is the one common issue that everybody have been dealing with in this year of 2025?
Oh my God. 2024 and 2025. Political issues, I think, have been one of the biggest stressors for so many people. And I think it's because it's hit in a different way. Typically, we see a lot of social issues and a lot of activism that's kind of disparate, right? Which means it's like Black Lives Matters is over here. And then we have like farm workers and Latino communities and deportation in another area. And I don't know, for women, there's women issues, right? But in politics this last year, I think a lot has come to the surface with the new presidency, with taking away rights and taking away rights from queer folks, from women, from immigrants. So I think it's been spreading a lot more. Also, a big issue has been the genocide in Gaza, which a lot of people have come to me on both sides, right? So some people who are pro-Israel and some people who are pro-Gaza, right? Not pro-Hamas, but pro-Gaza. So that has been a really big issue. I think for me, seeing what people are bringing to the table with politics in these, like the last year.
But throughout that, like, do you blame, in that case, do you blame the media, or do you blame, or you just tell the people, watch what you're watching?
Oh man,
because
this
you know
is,
a lot
this
of
is the
people.
stickiest one, right?
Yeah.
This is really, really tough because I consider myself an anti-racist therapist, right? So I'm doing anti-oppression work. So thinking about who is in power. I know, same cough at the same time. Thinking about who's in power. No. Who's in power and what issues are currently like coming up in therapy. Let's say that there's, okay, so I'm trying to think of like with keeping HIPAA compliance, I'm trying to think of some of the things that have been issues, is looking at media, right? Is what are the messages we're being targeted to, right? And where are the things that seem a little bit too extravagant, right? So denying some of the things that have been happening in Gaza because of the war and human suffering. And so when somebody has a certain bias that's super, super strict, right? There's no room for thinking any differently from hearing somebody else's side of the story, from taking in new information. That's super media like heavy, right? Because we're programmed to get certain messages and then our algorithms put it in our faces. So in the therapy session, I try to push back a little bit reverently, like with respect, like, okay, let's take a look and see if it's not just so monolithic, right? What about other issues like starvation? What about human suffering? What about the messages that we could be getting that are extravagant that maybe we need to look into a little bit more to see if they're actually legitimate? And that's really hard for people. And it's even hard for me as a therapist sometimes because you grow to love your clients and your patients and you really want the best for them. And I feel like it's my duty to help people evolve past racism, past prejudice.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, because, you know, we live in a world now where, like, the media does a good job, you know.
Too good of a
The
job.
media does a good job in, you know, creating their own stories, and those stories can really impact the way other people think.
Absolutely.
And that's why there's so much disagreements in a lot of different topics.
Yeah.
Let's talk about just the election itself.
Yeah.
You know, there has been some good side of some people, bad side of some people. But like the way the media works is that it just knows how to make one side look good than the other,
Yeah.
or make the other side look even better than the other side. And that really creates, like you said, it creates that room of, it creates that gap where people don't even have room to even,
They never get any other messages.
Yeah.
Right? If you're in the silo and you're being fed by the algorithm or whatever like platform you're on,
right.
you're going to get the same message over and over again. And that's the danger of a single story, right? If you're only hearing one side or one perspective, you're missing a lot of information. And not that you have a right decision or a wrong decision to make, but it's about the idea of questioning, what do I believe? What am I thinking here, right? Where is there room for me to grow? And where can I learn a little bit deeper understanding about myself or about the situation, regardless, like politics, the president, how Elon Musk is doing, what is he doing in the presidency, what's happening there? Like a lot of questions. It's about questioning and hearing more than one story, right? And that's the biggest thing that I've learned in all of my life, in all of my different professions, is people have so many stories, and it's important that we share the stories. And the more stories we have, the richer and more information we can have about the world around us.
And the more united we become.
Exactly.
You know, I feel like when people are able to sit down and have a civilized conversation, they're more likely to come to a conclusion.
Absolutely.
You know, because when we don't, because a lot of people nowadays, they're afraid of confrontation. You know, people can't sit down and talk face to face. They'd rather go on social media and do that.
Right.
You
And people become like little social media warriors, right?
Yeah.
Where they can like start bullying other people online.
Exactly.
And that's no good either, right? So the idea of sitting down face to face is so important, or even having like dialogue online, like video. Like, how do we find community? How do we start getting more information? Right. And to be able to open ourselves up to bigger and different perspectives is super important, especially when the algorithms and narratives are so powerful. Narratives can either oppress people, or narratives can liberate people, right? That's the power of like how people's stories are told, like slavery in the United States. How it's told and how it's retold, or how it's silenced, really impacts how people understand and connect with issues.
Right. Yeah, most definitely. So speaking of social media, you know, social media have caused a lot of trauma amongst people, and even because I know even like PTSD and so on. But like as a therapist yourself, how do you kind of like help a client that's dealing with either trauma or PTSD in either that case or just whatever background they're from?
Yeah. Okay. So it could reach a lot of different areas, right? And so let's just say you are of Middle Eastern descent and you're looking at what's going on globally right now. And you're getting a lot of information, especially after October 7th, I think 2 years ago now. It just was so much information. You saw so many videos. You saw things that were really disturbing, right? You saw things that we don't normally see in every day. So if you already have that experience and that trauma of being a person of Middle Eastern descent, no matter where you live, in the diaspora, if you're still there, taking in all of that content can be too overwhelming and can be negative to our system, right? It's important to witness and it's important to see what's going on, but we need to limit how much energy and how much space we give to those kind of social media stories and how much that content is. So limiting your content intake is super important, right? And then another part is like thinking about social media, and for both men and women and non-binary people, what are the stories and the narratives being told online in terms of money, power, success, beauty, fitting in with all these social stereotypes that are really quote unquote important to us as people that we use to measure ourselves, right? And remembering that social media is completely fabricated. It is rare when you see somebody's social media who is a producer or like a social media person, right? Who doesn't have highly produced content, who doesn't have perfect angles, who doesn't have filters, and realizing that's a myth. And what you're comparing yourself to, whether it's money, chains, beauty, any of these big things, right? That's not real. And most people don't live their lives like that. And so what they're selling you is a dream. What they're selling you is a story.
A lot of people that sell that dream. Fake it till you make it, you know.
Yeah, and I believe in fake it till you make it. My mother told me for my life, like, fake it till you make it. Fake it till you make it.
You know the story of Drake, actually. Drake used to drive around Toronto in Rolls Royce.
Yeah.
And the Rolls Royce was rented.
No.
But a lot of people didn't really know that. But he did that in a way that to make people look at the rappers as the ones with the big money.
Right? Success.
You know? And that actually opened up a lot of doors for him. He faked it until he made
it, right? And listen, I am a hip hop head. And I'm a Toronto girl, 416 for life. I love like
it's crazy. Toronto and Los Angeles,
yeah.
They're beefy right now.
Yo, that was like the best part of my year last year. I was staying up until 3 a.m. That was like giving me life. That was like the one spot of like hope that I had, like entertainment last year. So I love Drake, old Drake, right? I love Drake who, makes us dance. That Drake, not the Drake who acts tough, like Kendrick says, right? But to sell that dream, to fake it till you make it, right, is really important. And to know that he has talent, he has worth. He's not the greatest rapper in the world, but he has talent. And to know that kind of like, right, faking it to make it is the way that we try to access success and have doors open to us. So psychologically, in psychology, we have learned through studies and research that pretty looking people, quote unquote, pretty to standard society or society standards, get further in life. They get better jobs. They get better pay. They are socially more accepted, right? So kind of going back to that social media thing and also fake it till you make it, right? We have to understand that narratives are important in how we show up, right? Dress for the part you want to be, right? My mother used to tell me that too, right? Look good if you want to be somewhere in a higher place, right, in life. But there's limits.
Yeah. And also, I want to ask you this, because, it's a lot of stigma.
Yeah.
throughout society.
Yeah.
So, like, how do you see the stigma about? Because I was actually having that conversation before we even started this podcast. I kind of mentioned it
Yeah.
because of where I'm from.
Yeah.
So, like, but how do you see the stigma around mental health changing, especially with increased awareness in the recent years?
Yeah.
You know, because throughout COVID, there's a lot of people that had to go through a lot of things. You know, a lot of people were locked in the house. They've never experienced that in their entire life. So all of a sudden, as they got outside the world, like everything changed for them.
Everything. First of all, a lockdown, right? That's something, a global lockdown, basically, something we've never imagined. We couldn't imagine that in our own psyche. So, first of all, that was like a major leap. We're like, whoa. And it was like, took us too much. It was like, whoa, like mind blowing, right? Then on top of it, so that is going to cause mental distress, depression, anxiety, all of that. Then we're in the house, wherever you live, whether you're alone or you live with family or friends or whatever. We've barely ever, I don't know if we've ever had a period in time where we had to be with ourselves for extended periods of time. And that gives you time to reflect and to realize what's going on with you. So I think COVID was a big factor. I think social media has been a big factor. And during COVID, so many more people started going into therapy. And virtual therapy became much hotter and much more important because you couldn't leave your house, but more people could access it, right? And there's this thing, phenomenon that I found is it works with a lot of people. Some people like to be in a certain session, go to a certain location for therapy because it kind of makes their safe space. But being able to do therapy from home is really dope because you get to be in your own environment. You get to be where you're already physically comfortable, right? But so the uptick in therapy, I think socially it's changing because a lot of more people needed to access it during COVID, post-COVID, and a lot of the ramifications after the world opened back up, right? How do we socialize? What am I thinking? Like, how do I understand the world? But really digging into our own issues. And on social media, there's been a lot more young influencers and creators who are speaking about their therapy experience, right? Like saying, hey, I went to therapy. It changed me. It was like this, right?
Yeah, and that's influencing a lot of people to actually participate and actually try it for themselves.
Yeah.
You know, and also like, cause I was gonna ask you this question. Like I had this question in mind where basically it has been a lot of people, you know, just being afraid to try therapy, especially men.
Oh,
You
that's
know,
a
like
whole nother, we could go all day on this, yep.
especially men, because
Yes.
a lot of times men throughout society we're expected to be strong. We're expected to deal with issues, and a lot of people say men do not. Some people say
Yeah.
men don't have feelings just because the way we act. As soon as a man act a certain way, as soon as a man shows his emotions, he's weak. He's labeled as weak.
Right, vulnerability.
Exactly.
Right? And this is what we're taught in society, is that men need to be hyper masculine. And to be hyper masculine, you can't feel. You can't feel feelings, right? And if you do get to feel a feeling, typically it's anger or rage is the first one that men typically go to. But when we think about emotions, there's something called like an emotional iceberg. You can Google it, look it up. And anger is just a surface protection emotion, right? But if that's the only emotion you've been able to access or allowed to access, right? Because social training, home training, society beliefs, right? What we hear in media and music, like we get messages where men are not supposed to be emotional. But on the other end, and this is like such a fascinating area for me, I love the male-female dynamic when it comes to thinking about emotion and emotional intelligence, what we call EQ, is women are dying. Like we are out here begging for men who know how they feel, who can open up and be vulnerable, who can let us in, right? We don't want to be the only person in the relationship who has emotions. To love somebody is emotional, right? To love your family is emotional. But to really open up and understand all of the different layers, I can imagine how hard that would be. I'm not a man, so I don't know, but I can imagine it would be really hard.
with women actually begging for that.
Yeah.
Because, like I already mentioned, there's some women who are begging for it, but like there's other women who make fun of that. Like as soon as a man opens up, or they can use that
As a
whatever
weapon.
information,
I've
against
seen
them.
it.
You
And
know,
this is toxic behavior, right? That is weaponized abuse. That is abuse, right? You're weaponizing someone's experience and emotion. And even mocking it, right? That is internalized misogyny. That is internalized depression. And women who do it, they do it to themselves. They do it to men. They're perpetuating this understanding that men are so monolithic. Again, that single story, men can only be one thing. Absolutely not. I think some of the most brilliant men that I've ever come across in life are super dynamic. They're vulnerable. They're intelligent. They're empathetic. They can understand how other people feel, but they still have masculinity. And in my mind, that makes you like double fine. It's like, oh my God, not only is this person a great person, but they know how to deal with their emotions. They know how to talk about stuff. But it's, again, it's so vulnerable, like you said, to be able to share that with certain people. You got to know who you can trust to share that information with, right? We have to be the people who vet who we let in our lives. Does it feel safe? Is this a pattern that I've already been through, right? What is making me feel like I can trust this person?
Right. And, you know, since 2022, I believe, 2022, the suicide rate amongst males was 4 times higher.
Yep.
You know, and I think even today, the suicide rate is still high amongst
really
men.
high.
But like, how do you, as a therapist yourself, you know, because you know, right now you're, like you mentioned, you're working with women at the moment. But like, how would you, like, what advice would you give to a man that's struggling to seek for help?
Yes, there's so many. I should correct myself. I do work with men in couples therapy.
Oh, okay.
And I have worked like in Paris, and I have worked with men in the past. But it just so happens that I worked for a women organization and a women like a women's health organization. And then when I went out and I'm doing my own thing with my other practice when they supervisor, it's just seems like a lot of women are interested in the vibe that I guess I'm giving off and my profile gives off. Right. But when I come to like thinking about men and vulnerability, I think exposure and therapy, or exposure and narratives, right? Like we were talking about, what information, how can we see, where's the representation? So I like to give people homework on their own, especially like men on their own. Like, okay, you go do this, just watch this video, watch this thing, and see how you feel about it, right? So there's someone that I really love, this therapist. He's out of Los Angeles. I'm sure maybe you've heard of him. He has a TV show, or had a TV show on Vice, and it was called The Therapist. And he's a Black older man who is a psychotherapist who incorporates meditation, mindfulness, and spirituality. He looks kind of like a little Buddhist monkey type, like Erykah Badu vibe, like all like mixed together.
That's crazy.
And so he's done therapy sessions with so many rappers, like Joey Badass, one of my favorite people in the world. He's done therapy in those, so they videotape this one session with you so you can see how it goes, right? So it demystifies what's going to happen in a therapy session. How can I speak to anyone about my own feelings? So letting it happen through the venue of a male therapist talking to other males, and not only other males, but I mean, women have come on the show and all this other stuff, but specifically to men, to see that we can demystify it. It doesn't have to be so scary. And when you realize that it's more like a conversation, then they can kind of see themselves in that. There's also like Black Men Build, great account to follow. They also have like magazines. They have a lot of resources, and seeing like where you can find a therapist that's going to fit your needs. There's websites that are all databases of just Black therapists, just Latino therapists, and a mix of the both. Like whatever your background is, you can find that person you're looking for.
Yeah, most definitely. And also food. Food is huge. Yeah. We're just having a conversation. You say Los Angeles has more healthier food than Buffalo, New York.
Yeah.
You know, and I was like, oh, wow, that's surprising. You know, because when I came here, food really tasted different.
Yeah.
You know, it tasted different. Like, I can really, you know, sometimes it took me time to kind of like adjust to it. But eventually now I eat food here.
You eat out.
Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes you gotta save the money, you know. But yeah, so and food has been a major talk topic. You know, people have been talking about food, saying that food is also one major cause mental health issues. You know, people are dealing with mental health issues because what they're consuming on a daily basis. Do you believe that's also another issue? And what do you have to say about that?
Absolutely. And I think you bring a really good point of what do we consume, right? So we were just talking about what do we consume through media? What do we consume through the internet? Everything we put in our body is going to have an effect on us. So even the foods that we eat, right? We want to make sure that we're getting enough nutrition. We're drinking enough water. Strangely enough, I know it sounds dumb, but like drinking enough water is going to help you and help your nervous system, help your brain function, help you feel a little bit better, right? So food and water. And knowing when it comes to food, food can be something that we can use as a coping skill too, right? And it can become a negative coping skill if we either overeat, we eat our emotions, right? Which I am guilty of, and I'm always in practice of trying not to eat my emotions, especially coming from like a culinary family. Like food was super important to us, and that was like a place where we could feel calm and connected, even though the amount of chaos and nonsense that was happening around us, right? But really being aware of what you put into your body is step one, right? And being aware too of how your body feels after that, right? Your mind, your physical body. And that's something we call a lot about, we talk about somatics, right? Somatics is how does the body carry emotion? How do we deal with trauma or mental illness? Through hacking the nervous system, right? And so that means you have to become really attuned to yourself, to how you feel, to where you have pains in the body, to how you feel after you eat certain foods.
Right.
So is there like a certain food that you particularly like feel good after you eat, like either emotionally or physically?
Right. For me personally, to be honest, I'd say it depends, especially like my culture of food. I eat a lot of home cooked meals.
Yeah.
And when I do eat home cooked meals, I feel good.
Yeah,
You know, because I mean, it's in the house. My mother, my sister, whoever cooks,
Yeah.
they understand. Okay, this is what he likes.
It's so loving.
And it's something that I've been eating since I was a kid. So it's something that I can always say it makes me feel good.
Yeah.
You know, but I've actually experienced like I've actually experienced where one time I ate fast food and the next day I woke up, I felt very, like my head felt very heavy. To the point like I felt like something was just pulling me back in bed. Like I didn't really want to get up and do something.
Yes.
You know, and I'm like, wow, so like this is actually like very, very bad.
Yeah, man, it really affects you, right?
And people eat it every single day. Do you think that's why a lot of people in America seek therapy? Because it's a lot of people that consume all these foods that we're talking about.
I wish more people understood the link between like what we eat and how it affects our bodies, right? Dead Prez speaks a lot about this in their albums, and I think they're vegan, but the idea of taking care of your physical body and your mental body through food, through what we consume, through how you think, and to be able to recognize like fast food doesn't sit right with me, doesn't make me feel good. Same thing. I am a French fry lover. I'm a vegetarian, but I love French fries. Don't let me eat too many French fries because I'm like, oh, I never eat fast food. Then I'm like, oh, my stomach hurts. Oh, I don't feel good. Oh, I'm tired. Like it definitely, once you start to get in tune with what you consume and how it affects you, you feel the difference pretty quickly.
Yeah, most definitely. So we're getting closer to the end, and I want to ask you a few other questions because, you know, therapy can be very expensive, and not everybody is able to afford therapy.
Yes.
You know, there's people that come from, you know, homes where they're dealing with so much. They've dealt with so much trauma, but they seek for therapy. They seek for someone to speak to, but they can't afford it.
Yeah.
You know, so like what simple daily habits or practices can those people incorporate into their lives to improve their mental well-being?
This is such a good question. One thing I love to do and I encourage people to do is either through voice notes or through writing, right? Just write down what's in your head. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to make sense of it right now, but just getting it down on paper, right, or even through your voice is really important so that you have a place to process, right? You don't have to share that with anybody else. It could be completely private. And that way you can go back and look at what you're writing and see like, oh, shoot, I was feeling this, or this is a reoccurring issue for me. So writing. Number 2 is mindfulness and meditation. And people think like, pardon me, people think that mindfulness and meditation is really, really tough, which it is, but it's like a muscle, right? So I give people small bits to kind of help them understand how to build that muscle for mindfulness and meditation. Because one thing that trauma does is it gets us out of our body. So I'll come back to that in a second, pin in that. But if you can do small breath work, right? If you can do, for me, I give it an example of when you're washing your dishes, just being mindful, being present, thinking about it, right? Feeling the way that the warm water and the soap feels on your hands. looking at the plate, right, from dirty to clean, and putting it into like where it belongs, and just being able to keep your mind focused on this one thing for like 10 minutes, right, is a great practice, so that every time your brain starts going somewhere else, you bring it back in, and you come back and you return to the dishwashing, right? So that's a simple one to try to help grow the muscle for mindfulness and meditation. Another one that I really encourage is trying to calm our nervous system down. People with trauma and people who live in this world, a lot of us, me included, have our nervous system on high, right? We're stuck in this fight or flight mode. And to be able to get us to calm down and to be mentally more healthy, and to be emotionally more regulated and physically more regulated, there's something that's like a triangle breath. You breathe in for 4, and then you hold at the top for 4, and then you release for 4. You do that 10 times, and I guarantee you will start to feel your nervous system be much more relaxed. Even tuning in with your own body, like putting your hand on your heart and your stomach and just doing like, yo, what am I feeling right now? What is going on in my body, right? That's simple ways to start understanding your emotion and understanding what you might be feeling. Sharing with close people is really important too. But for me, I'll lay it on the table. I grew up in a lot of domestic violence. I experienced a lot of physical violence, poverty, sexual violence, community violence, sexual assault and rape when I was in high school, a very toxic, abusive relationship with a narcissist for almost 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah, man. And I
want to ask you, I'm sorry to cut you short, but what made you stay in that relationship for 10 years? Because sometimes I don't understand.
Right. This is, oh, sorry, my bad.
Sometimes I don't understand.
Right?
Because when people will cry and say like this person is very bad, but still stay there. Is it fear of them coming after you after that, or is it fear of you losing the person that you gave your whole life to?
Okay, it's kind of neither, which is crazy. Your brain chemistry actually changes when you're in abusive relationships, right? So the way that narcissistic abuse and abuse changes your brain is through neural pathways, through chemicals, dopamine, and for dopamine hits, right? The cycle of abuse and violence, domestic abuse, emotional, physical, financial, any of it, right? There's so many different layers or types of abuse in a relationship. They do the love bombing is first, right? So it's like, oh my God, you're so beautiful. I've never seen anybody like you before. The way that you wear those headphones is like, never seen it. I just like want to be around you all the time. And they treat you like you're the best thing on earth, right? So speaking in a woman's perspective, there's so many times when we are unvalued, right? We don't feel important. We are abused by society, abused by family, abused by friends, abused by partners, that we're already primed, right? So somebody starts to treat you like you're the best thing on earth. And to be honest, I was dope shit when this person met me, so I was like, oh yeah, I'm pretty cool. Like, that makes sense. Like, right. I'm like, okay. So they do the love bombing, and they're like, oh, give you presents, like take you out to dinner, treat you a certain way, be so nice. And then on the other hand, then they will start like taking away like their interest, right? They'll start stonewalling you, not paying that much attention to you, and doing things that
they already have you,
so because they already got you,
right?
And you're already in this cycle. So then the cycle is like, oh no, I'm going to be better. I'm going to be so much nicer. Then you get through a nice period, right? And this starts to screw up your brain chemistry, and then you get back to like, okay, more love bombing, and then you go back to like the abandonment, the abuse, the narcissism, whatever kind of the violence, whatever's happening in the situation. And so your brain keeps going in this one spiral, so it learns how to operate this way. Second thing, in my case, I grew up seeing domestic violence. Oh my God. And what we see is what we do. And so thinking about relationships, I always tell people, like, what relationship did you see your parent or parents have in their relationship? What kind of examples of love did you see?
All right.
So many of us see toxic examples of love, and that's what we're primed to do because we know it, right? And when we already know it, like when you are in an abusive relationship or abusive home, you are so much, statistically, so much higher chances of getting in an abusive relationship. So then you want to leave, but it takes, on average, 7 attempts to leave an abusive relationship, whether it's emotional abuse or physical abuse, because the brain chemistry, because they make you feel so terrible about yourself, because you start to dissociate, right? You start to get out of your body. There were days I spent there were weeks that I didn't know what happened to me. I would go to my therapist at the university I was going to. She'd be like, what did you do this week? I couldn't tell her anything. I was like, I was with my stepson, and I was with my partner, and that was it. And I was like, I didn't want to work. I couldn't tell you much else. And this is not uncommon, right?
Yeah.
So thinking about what we see and we repeat that behavior. And so we have to unlearn those ways that our body seeks dopamine, love, adrenaline, all these good, happy feelings, right? And we are so desperate for love in society. I don't think men and women talk about it that much, especially men, but I think men really want to be loved deep down.
Oh yeah, most definitely. We want to be loved too. Come on now.
Yeah. give them a little love.
Most definitely.
Yes.
But yeah, thank you so much. Because I know you're a very busy woman. I don't want to take so much of your time, but I really appreciate you for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, guys. This is East Spin Child Podcast, man. Y'all go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to like and comment. And I'm gonna put your contact information and everything, so whoever is interested in, booking with you or talking to you,
Absolutely.
they'll be able to reach out.
And the thing lastly, about finding health, like mental health care is so expensive, right? There are people who, like for me, I went to community health care, right? So that's like, I would pay $5 at a community health center or like sliding scale. You can find those resources, right? So we can look at that. You can go to opentherapy.com to find low pay insurance or therapy. A lot of resources. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and we can take it from there.
Thank you. All right, guys. Let's see you guys next time. Bye. Yeah. All right.